May 1945. Berlin, the capital of the empire that had once terrified Europe, was now a wasteland of ashes. On the streets that had only a few years before echoed the sound of Wehrmacht boots, now there was only the sound of wind whistling through charred buildings and the acrid smell of burning steel, rubble, human flesh, and gunpowder smoke. The whole city seemed to be suffocated in a giant silence, the kind of silence that only comes after the storm of history. The dim moonlight filtered through the gray clouds, illuminating the twisted iron sign, Wilhelmstrasse. The street that had once been the center of power of the Third Reich was now nothing but rubble and the shadows of people trudging along. The defeated German soldiers, no longer in uniform, no longer proud, only with calloused hands trying to pick up pieces of wood, pieces of cloth to shield themselves from the wind. In a ruined corner where the house had been cut in half by a bomb like an open wound, a young girl sat silently. Elsa Müller, 27 years old, former nurse in the German Defense Forces. Her face was gaunt, her eyes deep as if she had witnessed too much death. In her hand was a medical coat that still smelled of antiseptic, and under that cloth, a small photo, her dead mother with the scrawled words, "For das Vaterland," for the fatherland. But now that fatherland was just a pile of rubble. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up since the days when Berlin was bombarded. She just sat there, looking at the horizon where the fire still flickered, towards the old American barracks, where trucks were pouring in, carrying soldiers and strange women, Americans with gentle faces, carrying bags of flour, milk, and smiles. American women, she heard someone say softly. They came to save German children. The words rang out in disbelief among the rubble. The Germans, their enemies, were now receiving bread from the hands of the victors. Elsa closed her eyes. Her mind still echoed with the old days, when she stood in the field hospital under bombs, when people shouted Sieg Heil, when she believed Germany was protecting civilization from chaos. Now she saw only naked, dusty children sitting around the fire, and American women in light uniforms cooking porridge in military pots. Something was choking in the air. A strange feeling crept between the old enemy. Not hatred, but shame, mixed with surprise and admiration. A young American soldier approached Elsa. He had no gun, just an open can of condensed milk. "Are you okay?" he asked in a slow Midwestern accent. Elsa looked up, her eyes meeting his for a moment. A look between two people who had once belonged to two opposite worlds. One who had saved German soldiers from death, and one who had dropped bombs on the city she lived in. "No one is okay," she said softly, her voice hoarse and cold. He was silent for a moment, then held the can of milk out in front of her. "Keep it. There are people here who need help, but don't let any more children starve to death." Elsa looked at the can of milk, hesitated, then nodded slightly. When her hands touched his, she realized they were shaking. There was no more war, but there was no more peace either. Just a long void where survivors were trying to learn how to be human again. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, a group of American soldiers and women were setting up the first field kitchen in Friedrichshain. The smell of thin porridge began to waft in the wind, whistling through the broken steel frames. The German children, skinny, dirty, shivering, lined up for the first time to receive food from the Americans. Some adults stood far away, not daring to come near, for fear of being seen as traitors, or simply because of their remaining pride. But when the first spoonful of porridge was put into the child's mouth, someone burst into tears. Not the child, but the German mother standing behind. And in that moment, Elsa understood. The world was changing. The war ended not just because the gun stopped firing, but because people chose to forgive. Not because they forgot, but because they were too tired to hate. That evening, Elsa walked through the ruins, heard the children laughing in the firelight. The sound, simple, fragile, but it made her heart flutter. She suddenly remembered the first time she heard such laughter as a child before the war in the small flower garden in front of her house in Potsdam. Now, all is lost, but the laughter remains, and somewhere in the ashes, she sees a small ray of light, like the title of this story. If you are watching this video, remember that war does not end in victory or defeat, but in the humanity found between people who were once on both sides. Follow the channel to continue my journey to discover the human stories hidden in the ashes of history. That night, Elsa did not sleep. Yeah, nice sir. The room she was in, which had once been a bomb shelter, now had only the mottled walls and the dripping sound of a broken water pipe. Outside, the wind whistled through the broken windows, carrying with it a biting cold. She wrapped herself in an old army blanket, but her heart was heavy as stone. On the table, the can of condensed milk the American soldier had given her still lay there, unopened. It was small, ordinary, but to her it was like a sacred object, both a blessing and an insult. A blessing because it was the first sign of humanity in the ruins. An insult because it came from the hands of the one who had created the ruins. She touched the cold metal can lightly, closed her eyes, and the past flooded back. 3 years ago, summer 1942, Berlin was still brightly lit. The cafe still resounded with band swing music. Elsa was then a military nurse stationed at the 37th Field Hospital near the Spree River. She was young and idealistic. She believed in the propaganda that the German army was defending a new and better order. Every morning when she put on her white blouse, she felt proud to serve Vaterland, the fatherland. She clearly remembered the image of Lieutenant Hans Becker, the young officer with bright eyes and a gentle smile. They met during a night shift when the sound of bombs echoed in the distance. Hans smiled. "If you don't come back tomorrow, keep this badge. It has the German eagle engraved on it, the symbol of our faith." Elsa accepted, not knowing that a few weeks later, Hans would die on the Eastern Front, his body never to be brought back. From that day on, every time she heard the siren, Elsa's heart ached. She still worked tirelessly, stitching wounds, stopping bleeding, injecting morphine, giving the dying a last sip of water. She lost count of how many people she had seen stop breathing in her arms. In those days, she still believed Germany would win. That belief only began to crack when she was transferred to a wounded soldiers camp outside Dresden. February 1945, Dresden was burning red. American planes appeared densely in the sky, like a flock of giant birds. Elsa ran through the hospital corridor amid the sound of bombs exploding and smoke, trying to pull the wounded out. A bomb fell a few dozen meters away. The force threw her against the wall. She woke up in the night in a sea of fire. Pieces of charred bodies were scattered everywhere. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air. In the rumbling explosion, she heard someone calling for help, weak, trembling, the voice of a child. She rushed forward. Amidst the rubble, a little girl was trapped under a collapsed beam. She pulled the child out and ran with her through the ash-covered street. When she stopped, she saw the child's eyes wide open, looking at her, a look that would haunt her forever. The child died a few hours later, burned so badly. From that moment, Elsa no longer believed in the glory of war. She returned to Berlin in April 1945, only to find the city gone. Every corner was lined with corpses, every street covered in ash. The SS soldiers still walked by, still gave orders to defend to the death, still hung red and black flags on every roof. But Elsa knew all that was left was the remnants of a collapsed dream. She was no longer a military nurse, but instead traveled everywhere looking for food, water, and shelter for the survivors. While searching for medicine in a bomb shelter, she was slightly injured in the shoulder, a small but persistent wound that never healed. Then the day came when American soldiers entered Berlin. No cheers, no resistance, just cold silence. The German flags were torn down, replaced by the American flag. Elsa stood watching, her heart empty. She was no longer anyone, not a soldier, not a loser, just a lost soul in the ashes of the century. Now, in the dark bunker, she opened her eyes and looked up at the cracked ceiling. The laughter of children outside still echoed among the footsteps of American soldiers. She suddenly understood the past could not be erased, but the present still needed to be lived on. She opened the milk can. The scent of condensed milk wafted up, sweet, fatty, strange. She poured some into an old iron bowl, stirred it with the remaining hot water, and then stepped outside. The German children were sitting around the fire, some skinny, some barefoot. She walked over and handed the bowl of milk to the youngest. The little boy looked up, his big round eyes shining with fear, then timidly took it. Elsa smiled, the first real smile in months. In the distance, the American soldier who had handed over the milk the day before saw the scene. He raised his hand in a slight salute, then turned away. In that moment, Elsa realized perhaps peace begins with small actions like this: a can of milk, a smile, a look free of hatred. Not all gunmen are evil, and not all victories are glorious. Sometimes, kindness comes from the very hands that once held the trigger. Follow the channel as I continue my journey with Elsa. where the ashes still burn and the light still shines. 1945, Berlin was in a windless morning, the sky gray and smoky. On the streets that had once been the heart of the Reich, now there were only scorched walls and collapsed roofs. Occasionally, a few children's laughter rang out, small, fragile like candlelight in a storm. In a temporary shelter in the wedding district, American soldiers had set up a makeshift kitchen. A long line of German women holding their children waited in line for food. They said nothing. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes sunken, their hands trembling as they held out rusty bowls. Elsa was there too. She was no longer wearing her uniform, just an old sweater, her head wrapped in a scarf. In her hand she held a washed milk can, a souvenir of that day. But she had not come to beg, she had come to help. The area commander was Major Keller, and with him came a group of American female soldiers in charge of humanitarian work. They were nurses, cooks, and relief workers, women carrying pots, pans, food, and something Berlin hadn't seen in years: compassion. Among the group was Mary Ann, a brunette American woman in her 30s who had been a teacher in Ohio before joining the army. When Mary saw Elsa arranging the line, she approached, smiling. "Do you know English?" Elsa hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Just a little. I learned it when I was little." Mary smiled slightly, then handed Elsa a ladle. "Then you'll help us distribute the soup. There are so many people today." Elsa looked at the ladle in her hand, feeling like she had just been given a part of the meaning of life. She nodded and began to scoop hot soup to the people in the line. The heat was making Mary's old glasses fog up, but they both had a gentle smile on their faces. The afternoon passed in silence. The German children sat around the wooden table, eating soup, giggling. The Americans and the Germans cleaned, cooked, and shared slices of hard bread. And in that moment, the boundary between the winning side and the losing side seemed to disappear. Mary told Elsa about her hometown, a small town with rolling cornfields, cozy evenings around the fireplace. Elsa listened, her eyes distant. She told Mary about her childhood, morning runs along the banks of the Spree, Christmas Eves with church bells, 2 women, 2 languages, 2 pasts, but they shared one thing: loss. Mary lost her husband in the Battle of the Bulge. Elsa lost her lover on the Eastern Front. They both saw the cruelty of war and understood that every victory must be paid for with blood and tears. In the afternoon, when the camp stove had cooled down, Mary saw Elsa sitting alone, wiping the iron ladle. She approached and asked softly, "Do you hate us, Elsa?" Elsa was silent for a long time. The wind blew, carrying the smell of smoke from the ruined buildings in the distance. She looked at her palm, where there was still a scar from the bomb fragments, and said slowly, "I used to hate, but then I realized hatred doesn't help anyone live again. I just want to live and help others live." Mary didn't say anything more. She just put her hand on Elsa's shoulder, a simple gesture, but enough to make both of them cry. In the following days, Elsa became part of the relief team. She taught a few words of German to the American children, and in return, learned English to make communication easier. She knew how to make a fire, cook soup from what was left in the food store, and every time she heard the laughter of children, she felt a little lighter. One morning, while the group was cooking lunch, a group of American military reporters came to take pictures. They took pictures of American women handing out food to German children. The image later appeared in many newspapers. In one photo, Elsa stood in the corner of the frame, holding a ladle, looking at the children. Her eyes were kind but sad. The photo was spread everywhere. No one knew her name, only the caption: "A German woman helping to give soup to the children of Berlin." But to Mary, she was not an unknown German woman. She was a friend. Another afternoon, as the sun set, Mary and Elsa sat together on a pile of rubble, looking at the city in the sunset. Mary said softly, "Do you believe that we will ever truly forgive each other?" Elsa replied, her voice hoarse but calm, "No one can forgive everyone, but if we start with a pot of soup, with a smile, maybe that is the beginning of something good." The afternoon wind blew the remaining ashes on the roof. Amidst the ruins, 2 women, 2 people who had been on opposite sides of the battle line, sat side by side, no longer enemies, but human beings. Amid the ashes of Berlin, women wrote the first chapter of peace, not with guns, but with soup ladles, not with hatred, but with kindness. Follow this journey, where people learn to forgive, not to forget, but to live. One morning in July 1945, Berlin was still damp after the night rain. The sky seemed to be covered by a heavy leaden curtain. Each weak ray of light shone through the broken windows, reflecting on the glistening puddles in the middle of the street. Elsa was lighting a fire behind the field kitchen when she heard the sound of a Jeep stopping outside the gate. 3 American soldiers got out, their coats soaked, their shoes covered in mud. The one leading the way was Major John Keller, a familiar face she could not forget. It was he who had given her the can of milk that day. Elsa stood still, not knowing how to react. Keller saw her, also stunned for a few seconds. Then he nodded slightly, his voice warm but a bit distant. "Hello, I didn't expect to see you again." Mary came out of the kitchen, smiling happily. "Major, you came back just in time. Today we have a special kitchen assistant." Then she patted Elsa on the shoulder, jokingly saying, "She saves me from hundreds of hungry children every day." Keller looked at Elsa, his eyes were somewhat complicated, as if he was looking back at himself in the past. He said softly, "I remember you. That day, you stood on the street corner, saying nothing, just looking." Elsa replied, her voice low, "Yes, that day I didn't know whether to hate you or be grateful to you." They didn't say anything more, but during the whole afternoon, Keller stayed in the kitchen, helping distribute food and clean water. He worked quietly, spoke little, only occasionally discussing the relief plan with Mary. Every time his and Elsa's eyes met, they were both silent, as if each was carrying a secret in their hearts. The afternoon fell, the rain stopped, the German children ran around the kitchen, playing, laughing loudly in the street corner. Keller stood watching them, his eyes shining with a strange sadness. He took out an old photograph from his pocket, a picture of his sister, Rachel, who was only 8 years old. Elsa happened to see it and asked softly, "Is she your daughter?" Keller shook his head. "My sister. She died in London in 1943 in a Luftwaffe bombing raid." His voice caught in his throat. "My parents never forgave Germany. I just want to understand why things like that happened." Elsa clenched her hands, a knife twisted deep in her heart. She knew that in some way during the war, she too had been part of the system that had caused similar things. She said softly, her voice trembling, "I am sorry, not for anyone else. It's just, I lost someone I loved at the front." Keller looked up at her, his eyes downcast. They were both silent. Between them was a void of history, where guilt and loss intertwined. Neither side could say they were right. The next day, Keller arrived earlier than usual. He brought a box of goods, bread, powdered milk, and an old harmonica. "The children seem to need music more than food," he said. That afternoon, under the kitchen porch, he sat playing the harmonica. The melody, melodious and sad, echoed through the rubble and ashes. Elsa stood far away, listening, her heart trembling. The melody, strangely, reminded her of the music of Hans, the soldier who had lain in the snow. After that afternoon, Keller and Elsa began to talk more. At first, it was simple things. Did you sleep well? Were the children good today? Then gradually, they talked about deeper things, fear, memory, lost faith. Keller said he had been afraid of the Germans, so afraid that he could not look them in the eye. But when he saw Elsa feeding soup to a child, he understood the enemy in his imagination was only human. A week later, as the sun set over the ruined city, Keller invited Elsa for a walk. They walked past the ruined buildings, through the grass growing between the rusted tanks. No one spoke. Only the wind whistling through the bullet holes, the soft sound of footsteps on the damp ground. Then Keller stopped. He pointed in the distance to where the Reichstag remained, charred and bare. "There," he said, "they say the war is over, but I think it never really ended in the hearts of the survivors." Elsa bowed her head, her eyes moist. "Because we carry it in our hearts," she whispered, "whether we like it or not." Keller looked at her for a long time, then whispered, "Perhaps peace does not begin with a treaty. It begins when one learns to see the enemy with human eyes." Elsa looked up, and for the first time she smiled. It was a tired smile, but strangely real. Keller smiled too. In that moment, two people, once on opposite sides, stood side by side in the ruins of war, and the world seemed to stop breathing. There are wars not on maps, but in the hearts of men, where the enemy becomes a mirror of oneself. Come with me on this journey, where in the ashes, two souls learn to forgive, not only each other, but the past itself. It was an August morning in Berlin, a thin mist covering the blackened roofs. Elsa woke early and walked out to the kitchen. She found Keller sitting there with a steaming cup of coffee. On the table, he placed an old envelope, its corner scorched. He spoke softly without looking at her. "They found this in the files left by the Wehrmacht. It has your name on it." Elsa paused. She looked at the envelope, her heart stopping. The handwriting on it. She recognized it at once. It was Hans. She took it with trembling hands and sat down in a chair. The letter had never reached her. It had been sent in the winter of 1944 from the Eastern Front. The ink was smudged, but the lines were still clear. The words of a dying soldier addressed to his beloved. Elsa, my dear, if you read this, I am probably dead. I don't know what I am fighting for anymore. My country, my honor, or just fear. Last night I saw a Russian soldier lying in the snow, not breathing. I looked at his face and saw myself in it. We are all lost people, Elsa. If the war ends, don't hate anyone. Live, and forgive me too for holding a gun. Elsa finished reading, tears falling on the old paper. She was silent for a long time, then said softly as if talking to herself, "He is still a good man." Keller didn't answer. He just sat there looking at her. After a while, he asked in a low, unreadable voice, "Did you ever believe what he said?" Elsa wiped away her tears and looked straight into Keller's eyes. "Back then, I believed in Germany. Now, I only believe in people." In that moment, something changed between them. No longer the gap between victors and losers. There were only two people, both carrying the wounds of what had been lost in their hearts. But the letter was more than just words of love. At the bottom of the page, there was a short postscript like a last wish. "If you survive, come to my father's old workshop on Friedrichstrasse. There, I left what I believe is my last truth." Elsa clutched the letter, her eyes blazing. "We must go," she said. Keller was surprised. "Where to?" "Friedrichstrasse. I must know what he left behind." That afternoon, they set off together. Berlin was now a ruined city. Collapsed buildings, burned tanks, and plane wrecks scattered along the roads. The smell of smoke and metal still lingered in the air. The smell of sin that time had not yet erased. Keller drove slowly through the empty streets. The two of them said nothing, only the sound of the engine fading in the cold wind. Finally, they came to an old factory. Its iron dome rusted, its hatch half locked. Elsa stepped inside. Inside, dust was thick. On the walls, old propaganda posters were torn. The slogan remaining, "Vaterland über alles," fatherland above all. She trembled as she opened the old wooden chest in the corner of the factory. Inside was a small notebook and a silver badge of the German army. Elsa opened the notebook. On the first page was the writing, "Diary of Hans Keller, 1943 to 1944. Keller was startled to see that they shared the same last name. Elsa looked at him surprised. "You're also named Keller?" He nodded, his eyes distant. "I've never met a German with the same last name, until now." She opened the notebook and they read together. The words inside were the bloody thoughts of a young soldier who was gradually losing faith. "I see more corpses than the sun. I hear the screams of my comrades in the night and the cries of my enemies as they fall. I wonder if one day someone looked at me and saw that I was just a human. Would anyone forgive me?" Keller read slowly, each word stabbing into his heart. He placed his hand on the page, whispering he understood what both sides forgot. Elsa nodded, tears falling continuously. "He died. But he left us with a different perspective. No more enemies, only those who had lost their humanity searching for it again." Keller stood still, looking at Elsa. "And you have found it, haven't you?" She raised her head, smiling sadly. "Maybe I'm just getting started." Outside, the afternoon light filtered through the broken windows, illuminating two people, an American soldier, a German woman. They stood in the middle of the abandoned workshop, holding the diary and the unsent letter. Nothing more needed to be said. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was understanding. It was peace. Fragile, but real. Keller said softly, "I will keep this book, not as proof, but as a reminder." Elsa nodded. "Keep it. You will do what Hans wanted. Tell the world that war has no winners." Keller turned away, his eyes gleaming in the afternoon sun. "War has no winners," he repeated. "Only those brave enough to love after it is over." A letter forgotten in the midst of war. A diary of the fallen. And two people on opposite sides of the conflict, reading it in silence. Stay tuned for the sequel, where the final truth about Hans and Elsa's choice between memory and the future will determine whether peace can truly be born from the ashes. Night fell slowly over Berlin. The distant church bells rang out brokenly, like a prayer for the souls who had not yet found rest. Elsa and Keller sat together in the small room of the old workshop. The flickering oil lamp reflected on their faces, tired but not yet able to leave. On the table, Hans's diary was open to the last page, a short line, as if scribbled in the dark. If anyone reads this, know that I am no longer who they think I am. I am not just a soldier. I am a witness to the truth that both sides are afraid to tell. Keller finished reading, frowning. The truth. What? Elsa shook her head, turning to the next page, but it was a torn page. A part of the paper had been torn away. Someone tried to hide it, she said softly. Maybe the Germans, or the Americans. Keller looked at her, his eyes tense. Are you saying we're involved too? Elsa didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to the corner of the wall where an old map hung crookedly. On it, in red pen, Hans had marked a spot. Tempelhof, Berlin's main airport during the war. He was there, she said. Maybe it all started at Tempelhof. The next morning, they left the workshop, heading toward the old airport. The road was full of bomb craters and ruins, but among the rubble, weeds were starting to grow. Elsa said softly, you see, life always finds a way to come back, even if it's just a blade of grass. Keller smiled slightly, but there was a vague worry in his eyes. He knew that every step closer to Tempelhof was touching a part of the past that many people wanted to bury. When they arrived, they saw a group of German workers clearing the rubble. An old man with silver hair stood in charge. When he saw Elsa, he stopped. Are you Elsa Brandt? She was surprised. You know me? The man nodded. I used to work with Hans. We were in the Air Force liaison unit. He always talked about you. Keller stepped forward and asked, do you know anything about Hans's notes? He said he saw the truth that both sides were afraid to tell. The man looked around, then lowered his voice. Hans once discovered a common plan, a secret exchange between some German officers and the Americans. Before the end of the war, it seemed they wanted to settle things for later. Keller was stunned. Settlement? You mean the Americans and the Germans made some kind of agreement before surrendering? Yes, the man said, his eyes clouded with fear. Not all Germans were loyal to Hitler, and not all Americans wanted the war to last. They needed to keep some German scientists for the weapons of the future. Hans knew that, and he wanted to make the truth known. Elsa clenched her fists, her voice trembling. And so, he was killed. The man was silent, then said softly, maybe so. He disappeared right after sending your last letter. Keller stepped back, feeling the ground beneath his feet shake. He knew the rumors of Operation Paperclip, the secret post-war plan where hundreds of German scientists were brought to America. But hearing it from a witness, right in the middle of Berlin, took his breath away. He looked at Elsa. She was staring into the distance, her eyes filled with tears, but strangely cold. He died for telling the truth, she said, and that truth became the foundation of the new world. Keller replied softly, sometimes, to have peace, people bury things that shouldn't be buried. Elsa turned and looked straight at him. So, is that peace really peace? The question left Keller silent. He couldn't answer. They went into the old hangar. It had once been the takeoff site for hundreds of German planes. Now only the twisted iron frames remained. In the middle of the floor, Keller saw a small piece of metal engraved with a serial number, H47K. He picked it up, the light reflecting off it, making it glint strangely. It's a technical number, Elsa said. It might have something to do with the document Hans had. Keller nodded. We have to find the rest of the diary. If someone tore it up, they wouldn't stop there. Late afternoon, as they left Tempelhof, a black Jeep pulled up. Two men in American uniforms got out. One looked at Keller and said coldly, Captain Keller, you're going too far. Keller froze. Who are you? Allied Forces Intelligence. The other replied, you've been ordered to return to headquarters immediately. And she, he looked at Elsa, is coming with us. Elsa backed away, her eyes frightened. Keller stepped forward, blocking her way. She didn't do anything. The officer narrowed his eyes. It's not what she did, it's that she knows too much. The air was heavy. Keller clenched his fists, feeling anger rising. But then he took a deep breath, knowing he couldn't risk it now. Give me 24 hours, he said. Then I'll give you a full report. The officer looked at him, paused for a few seconds, then nodded. 24 hours. After that, everything will be gone, including you if necessary. The car drove off, leaving a trail of dust in the twilight. Elsa turned to Keller. They'll kill us if they find out we have the diary. Keller nodded, his eyes cold. Then we have to publish it. Tonight. She looked at him, surprised. You're going to betray your own organization? Keller replied, his voice low and firm. I'm not betraying America. I'm betraying lies. Elsa looked at him for a long time, then smiled sadly. You're more like Hans than you think. That night, they returned to the workshop. On the table, the diary was open, the torn pages temporarily taped back. Keller began typing a copy, word by word, for his own records. Elsa sat beside him, her eyes focused on the small lamp. Outside, the wind blew through the rusted iron frames, making a sound like a distant cry. But in that small room, the two people continued to write. Not for victory, not for revenge, but to preserve the only thing that matters after war, the truth. In the darkness of peace, there are secrets that have never been told. One died for the truth, two lived to tell it. Nice. Stay tuned for part 7, when the light returns, where Elsa and Keller face the ultimate choice, to stay silent and live, or to speak out and not repeat history. That night, the sky over Berlin was a leaden gray. A light rain fell, but the wind carried the chill of days that had not yet been peaceful. Elsa sat by the window, looking out, where the rare light shone through the rain. At the table, Keller was still typing. The steady sound of the keys rang out. Not just the sound of work, but the sound of a silent oath. The truth would not be buried. Elsa asked softly, "Do you think they will leave us alone?" Keller stopped, raised his head to look at her. "No. But if we remain silent, people like Hans will have died in vain." She pursed her lips, her eyes distant. In that moment, she saw clearly in him something she had never seen in an American soldier before. Not power, but faith. The next morning, Keller arrived at the temporary Allied Communications headquarters in central Berlin, a building half destroyed but still with electricity. He entered carrying a suitcase containing a copy of Hans's diary. An American officer was waiting, the one who had warned him the day before. "Are you really going to do this, Keller?" "Yes," Keller replied firmly. "The people have a right to know, both Americans and Germans." The officer looked at him and shook his head. "You are playing with fire. If you go public, you will lose not only your rank, but your life." Keller replied, "I have seen too many people lose their lives because of lies. If I keep quiet, I will die too, only more slowly." The officer was silent. Finally, he opened the door, and Keller entered the broadcasting room. The room was small, lit by low-hanging round bulbs. An old microphone sat in the middle of the table. Keller took a deep breath, opened the transcript, and began to read. This is the record of Hans Keller, German soldier, 1943-1944. He recorded what everyone was afraid to say, that this war had more than two sides. In between, there were agreements, people, calculations. And while we were dying, they were building a new world on our blood. His voice echoed through the loudspeakers, drifting out through the small radio stations that still worked. In the ruined buildings, Berliners raised their heads, listening. The Americans on guard duty heard it too. No one knew who was speaking. But the voice, calm, sad, and true, made them unable to leave. Meanwhile, outside, Elsa was waiting in her car. She looked at her watch. The minutes ticked by like knives. Then she saw 4 black Jeeps appeared from the end of the street. She whispered, "No!" She jumped out of the car and ran into the building. Gunshots rang out. The glass shattered. American officers stormed into the broadcasting room. Keller sat there continuing to read. Hans said, "If one day someone reads this, tell the world that kindness is the only thing stronger than any weapon." I believe in that, and I believe that only by facing the truth can we be truly free. A loud bang, a flash of light. Keller collapsed, the microphone falling from his hand, emitting a long, staticky sound. Elsa ran to him and hugged him. Blood soaked his shirt, but his eyes were still peaceful. "You did it," she said through tears. He smiled weakly. "No, we did it." He gently reached out and placed a small key in her hand. "In the suitcase. There's another copy. Take it out. Don't let them erase it." Then he closed his eyes. Outside, sirens wailed. Elsa grabbed her suitcase and ran out of the building into the rain. Her shadow melted into the smoke, into the night, into the ashes of Berlin. Behind her, the red lights of military vehicles shone against the sky, reflecting like blood. She ran through the devastated streets, breathing heavily, her heart pounding. When she reached a small bridge over the Spree, she stopped. Under the bridge was a cold, slow-flowing stream of black water. She opened her suitcase, took out the copy of the diary, wrapped it carefully, and dropped it into the water. "Go," she whispered. whispered. Go with the truth to a place where people will listen. The wind blew hard. The last piece of paper in her hand flew up, swirled in the wind, and disappeared into the night. The next morning, Berlin saw its first sunshine after a long rain. A German boy bent down to the riverbank and picked up something that had drifted ashore. A wet piece of paper with a few lines of writing on it. He read slowly, his voice innocent. War has no winners, only those who have the courage to love after it is over. The boy looked up, watching the rising sun. The light shone into his clear eyes, the eyes of a generation that no longer knew the smell of bombs. Elsa disappeared after 1947. It is said that she went to Switzerland, taking with her the remaining documents of Hans and Keller. No one knows if she is still alive, but their story of people who chose truth over safety has become a reminder for every generation. When the world is covered in darkness, the light does not come from guns and bullets, but from the courage of those who believe in humanity. Oh, you have just listened to When the Light Returns, the final part of a series of stories about war, humanity, and truth. If you believe that history is not just the past, but a mirror for the future, subscribe to the channel, share this video so that the story of Elsa, of Keller, and of millions of unknown people will never be forgotten.